So with the Heart Lab, we're going to be looking at exercise 30 and 31. Now we're going to be flipping back and forth between figures 30.2 and 30.5. So you may have to flip back and forth as we're pointing to structures with the heart. So the first thing is 30.1, which is the picture of the location of the heart. The exact location is the anterior inferior mediastinum. So again, the mediastinum is the cavity in the center of the chest. It is anterior, so closer to the sternum, and inferior, kind of towards the bottom. The base, which is the wide end of the heart, is going to be under the second rib and pointing towards the right shoulder. The apex, the pointy end of the heart, is going to be in the fifth intercostal space, or between the fifth and sixth rib, and it's going to be pointing towards the left hip, and it is about 7 to 9 centimeters left of the midline. So looking at structures of the heart, again, figure 30.2 and 30.5. We have that base, the wide end, the apex, the pointy end. We're going to have the auricle of the right atria and the auricle of the left atria. We're going to have the pulmonary trunk. That will branch into the left pulmonary artery, the right one you can't see from this picture. And then we have the left pulmonary veins, again, the right ones you can't see in this picture. We have the aortic arch, we have the brachiocephalic artery, the left common carotid artery, and the left subclavian artery. And here's our superior vena cava. The outer layer is the visceral pericardium or the epicardium. The terms are interchangeable. But if you do use the pericardial term, you do have to have the word visceral in front of it because there's 3 types of pericardia. The other layers we'll see when we get to the inside of the heart. Now when we look at the circulation going to the heart, so coronary circulation figure 30.5 and table 31 or 30.1, the heart has to receive blood and oxygen and nutrients just like other parts of the body, so it has its own little circulatory system. So the arteries, we are going to have the right coronary artery that branches into the right marginal. That would go to the right side. We'll see that in a picture in a minute. As well as the posterior interventricular artery. And the left coronary artery is going to branch into the circumflex artery on the left side, which we'll see in another picture, and the anterior interventricular artery to the front. So it essentially is like a cube. You have the anterior interventricular artery feeding the front of the heart, the circumflex feeding the left side, the marginal feeding the right side, and the back side is the posterior interventricular artery. Now the veins, to return blood back to the circulation, we're going to have the great coronary artery, or vein, excuse me, right in front, so the great coronary vein. You do not have to know the anterior cardiac vein or the small cardiac vein. So we are going to have the great cardiac vein right here, kind of like the great pumpkin. Okay. Here is the left side of the heart. So we have the base, the wide end, the apex is the pointy end. Here's the auricle of the left atria. We're going to have the pulmonary trunk and the left pulmonary artery, the left pulmonary veins, the aortic arch, the brachiocephalic artery, the left common carotid artery, and the left subclavian artery. And here's that superior vena cava peeking over. The coronary circulation again, we're going to have the anterior interventricular artery going in the front. Here's our great cardiac vein in the front. Here is that circumflex artery, so going to the left side of the heart. And we can actually see a little bit of the coronary sinus. This is how all the blood comes from the coronary veins into circulation. Oops. Here is the right side of the heart. So we've got the auricle on the right atria, the base, the apex. Again, this is the epicardium. We can see the pulmonary trunk, and now we can see the right pulmonary arteries and the right pulmonary veins. Here is the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava. We have the aortic arch, and in this view we can only see the brachiocephalic vein. Again, returning to the coronary circulation, we can see that right coronary artery coming in, and that branch to the marginal artery going to the right side, and then the right coronary artery continuing over to the back. So here's the back of the heart. So this is the inferior vena cava. We have the right pulmonary vein, come here, right pulmonary vein and the left pulmonary vein. We have the coronary sinus. This is how blood is returning to the heart and to the circulation. This is the middle cardiac vein. So the middle cardiac vein and the great cardiac vein in the front join into the coronary sinus, and that returns back to circulation. It actually dumps directly into the right atrium and then continues forth. Here is that right coronary artery coming in, and this is the posterior interventricular artery going to the back of the heart. Again, the base is up there and the apex is over here. Now we've opened up the heart and we're coming back to figure 30.2, so this is more in line with picture B. If you look up at picture A, on the spiral side of the picture, you do not have to know the anterior cardiac vein. That is right above the right ventricle, and you do not have to know the small cardiac vein. On the free edge of the paper, right underneath the aortic arch, you do not have to know the ligamentum arteriosum, so you can cross that guy out. You'll notice all of the arteries sit in what is called the coronary sulcus. They're not on top of the heart, they're kind of nestled in a dent in the heart. I'm not going to ask the coronary sulcus, which is the dent. So beside each of those vessels, in parentheses, it says in coronary sulcus. You can ignore the in coronary sulcus. I'm not going to talk about the sulcus of the heart. And that also goes for the anterior interventricular sulcus. I would point to the artery, not the dent. Looking at picture B, spiral side, you do not have to know the fossa ovalis. That is right underneath the right pulmonary vein. You also do not have to know the pectinate muscle, which is right above the tricuspid valve. You do not have to know trabeculae carnae. That just means meat lattice. That's right underneath the word chordae tendineae. So fossa ovalis, pectinate muscles, and trabeculae carnae you can ignore. On the free edge, where it has aortic and pulmonary valves, they're missing the word semilunar. So you do have to have all three words for credit. So it would be aortic semilunar valve and pulmonary semilunar valve. In the chapter, when you're reading about the valves, it does list them. It does put SL next to them. They just didn't bother to write out the word fully on the picture. So unfortunately. So here's our opening up of the heart. We are going to see the right atria, and this is our right ventricle. This is the left ventricle and the left atria. So again, the atria collect blood, the ventricles pump blood. You'll notice the left ventricle is much thicker. That's because it pumps to the systemic circuit. It pumps to the body, where the right ventricle goes to the pulmonary circuit. It just goes to the lungs. So it's not going to have to be that muscular because it doesn't go very far. So the left ventricle is the thickest myocardial wall of any of the chambers because it has to pump to the top of your head and to the bottom of your feet. Separating the ventricles, we're going to have this interventricular septum. Other structures we have on the right side is going to be the tricuspid valve because it has three cusps or points to it. And attached to the tricuspid valve, we're going to have our chordae tendineae, our heartstrings, and they will attach the papillary muscle. So when the heart contracts, the papillary muscle will contract first compared to the ventricle, and that will pull the chordae tendineae, closing the tricuspid valve. So when the right ventricle pumps out, the blood goes out of the heart instead of backwashing into the atria. And we know backwash is always a bad thing. This is our pulmonary semilunar valve, so we can go into the pulmonary circuit, the pulmonary trunk, and then the left and the right pulmonary arteries coming back to the left and the right pulmonary veins to the left atria. We have the bicuspid valve, also called the mitral valve. That's because it looks like a mitre hat. That's the little hat that you'll see bishops and popes wear that has 2 points. So mitral valve or bicuspid valve. Again, it has chordae tendineae attaching to the papillary muscles. So again, when it's time for the ventricles to contract, the papillary muscles contract a split second before the rest of the ventricle, pulling the chordae tendineae, closing the mitral valve so we don't have backwash into the left atrium. And from the left ventricle, we're going to go out through the aortic semilunar valve, which is back under here to the aortic arch. Again, structure-wise, we still have the apex, the pointy end, we still have the base, we still have the aortic arch, the brachiocephalic artery, the left common carotid artery, the left subclavian artery, the superior vena cava here. Below here would be the inferior vena cava. Layers of the heart, we still have the epicardium on the outside. Then we have the myocardium, the muscle, and then lining it, we're going to have endocardium. Here's a tilted view so we can see the sides and the valves a little bit more efficiently. So again, we have the right atria, superior vena cava, inferior vena cava coming to the right atria through the tricuspid valve that has chordae tendineae attaching to the papillary muscles to the right ventricle. And from the right ventricle, we're going to squeeze out through the pulmonary semilunar valve, out the pulmonary trunk to the pulmonary circuit. And again, we have apex, base, epicardium, myocardium, endocardium, and this separating guy is the interventricular septum. From the left side, again, coming back from the pulmonary circuit through the left pulmonary veins and the right ones, which are over there, to the left atria through the bicuspid or mitral valve that has chordae tendineae attaching to the papillary muscles into the left ventricle. Again, the left ventricle is the largest of the chamber walls for the muscle, so the largest myocardium. And from the left ventricle, we're going to go out through the aortic semilunar valve into the aorta. And again, brachiocephalic artery, left common carotid artery, left subclavian artery. Again, we have the interventricular septum, we've got the apex, we've got the base. Layers, we're going to have the epicardium, the myocardium, and the endocardium. So as we move over 30.2c, you do not have to know the posterior vein of the left ventricle that is on the free edge right above the word left ventricle. And again, if it's a sulcus, you do not have to know. Figure 30.3, which is showing you all the valves in one slice and a super close-up of the chordae tendineae. Those are interesting pictures, but they're not pictures you're going to see on a practical, so you can ignore those. 30.4 shows you the systemic versus the pulmonary circuit. We care about the pulmonary circuit for practical 1. The systemic circuit, the body, that is practical 2. So what you need to do is on page 475 in your lab book, that is going to be the pulmonary circuit. Okay, so we're looking at figure 32.13. Now, if you have an older lab book, it may be a slightly different page number, slightly different figure, but it's identifying the vessels of the pulmonary circulation. It's usually activity 4, and it shows the chambers of the heart going through from the pulmonary trunk to the pulmonary veins to the lobar veins, and then back eventually to the left atria. There is a black and white photograph of this page in your handouts that you should have printed out and have been looking at. But if you want the color version, again, it's the identifying vessels of the pulmonary circulation photo picture in the blood vessel chapter, chapter 32. So in the bicycle book, it's on page 475, figure 32.13. So the pulmonary circuit is on practical 1, not on practical 2. Okay. Going back to chapter 30, again, we've talked about figure 30.5. 30.6 is a slide. We don't care, but it does have a little picture of how the muscles run. So you'll notice that the atrial muscles run in a figure 8, and the ventricle muscles run in a spiral. That allows, again, the atria to squeeze down, and then the ventricle muscles to push up and out of the heart. So just an interesting picture to look at the directionality of the muscles. 30.7 is the sheep heart. So we obviously are not dissecting sheep heart. Now, if you have a butcher that can give you a sheep heart, go to town. But we're not going to have pictures of a sheep heart dissection or do the sheep heart dissection, so you can skip that component. And when you're doing the lab lists for your points, there is a section of sheep heart. Just go ahead and fill that out. It's pretty straightforward. It's just like the regular heart. Just think of it as extra study time. Okay, and 30.8 again shows you the sheep heart again. Now it does have that little picture showing you how thick the left ventricle is compared to the right ventricle. but 30.8 you don't have to worry about. Exercise 31 is a reading chapter. So I could ask you word questions. I don't have an EKG machine to share with you guys, so we're not going to run real ones or anything like that. But I could ask you about the conduction system. So figure 31.1 is essentially a yellow version of this guy right here. So I could ask you, what is that, or what is that? So again, we have the SA node, the sinoatrial node. They're going to transmit electrical currents through both of the atria. That is your pacemaker. Even in parentheses it says that. Even in your book it says that. It goes to the AV node, where it's going to stall to allow for the atria to contract. Then we go through the bundle of His, or the atrioventricular bundle. Once it gets to the interventricular septum, it will split into the left and the right. So the left and the right AV bundle branches. Once it gets to the apex, it does a U-turn to what are called the Purkinje fibers. Now, your lab book just calls it the subendocardial conducting network. Wow, that just sounds super fancy. I use Purkinje fibers. Again, you'll notice that we name things several different ways, and your book is trying to get away from labeling something based on somebody's name. So Purkinje was a person who studied these fibers. So I use Purkinje. If you want to know it as subendocardial conducting network, that's a lot of words. That's great, but you're not going to see that. I'm just going to type Purkinje fibers. Okay. So that's the electrical wiring of the heart, how electricity moves from one area to the other, the conduction system. Figure 31.4 shows you the leads of the EKG. So this is if you have the full leads, and this is just the typical lead 1, 2, and 3. How we usually do the leads, and when we talk about the leads, we are talking about lead 2, which is going to be connected up to your right arm and your left leg. The right leg is always neutral, so nobody touches that guy. The lead 2 is the best reading because it's in the same direction or angle that the heart is sitting in the body. But obviously, if your patient doesn't have legs, you can't use a lead 2, so you would have to use a lead 1, which is left and right arm. If you're missing a right arm, you can't use 2 or 1. You have to use lead 3, which is left arm and left leg. So I could ask you, which lead doesn't have a leg? That'd be lead 1. Or what is the most common lead? That's lead 2. So again, I can ask you questions about the leads. Here is your EKG. This is figure 31.2. So I could ask you, what is that wave? What is that? What is that? Pretty straightforward. And I could also ask you what's going on during the activity. Table 31.1 kind of describes the beginning and end points of the EKG. Table 31.2 describes abnormalities. And as you read through the electrocardiogram information, it describes what's going on with the P wave or the QRS wave or the T wave. So I could ask you about those things. And you can not only find them in your lab book, you can find them in your textbook and in your notes. We get super detailed with that. So again, P wave, that's usually when the electrical current is going through the atria. The PR segment, that's when the atria contracts. The QRS, that is when the electrical wave goes through the ventricles. The ST is when the ventricles contract. So we have systole of the ventricles, systole of the atria. The T wave is when the ventricles repolarize. The repolarization of the atria is buried over here, so we don't get to see it. And the T to the P is when everybody's in diastole. They're just sitting there doing nothing. So this, again, is going to be real important if you're going to do your EKG bonus. That bonus is worth 8 points on your first practical, so it's a good bonus, and it helps to get your feet a little bit more wet into what is parts of the EKG and what does this pattern indicate for the heart, that scenario. Now, in your book, your figure 31.3 may be different. If you've got the older text lab book, so if you've got the guy with the star on his chest, gymnast guy, and the black lab book, you're going to have this as your 31.3. If you have the angry looking pole vaulting chick or the bicycle guy, you have this as your 31.3. Both of these pictures are equally important. You can Google these if you want to keep, have a printout if you have one version versus the other. This one is showing you excitation of the heart. So this is that excitation wave spreading through the atria and then spreading into the ventricles and then fully exciting the ventricles. This one shows you first depolarization. You have to excite before you depolarize. So you can see the depolarization wave spreading through the atria and then through the ventricles. And then you can see the repolarization spreading. And as I mentioned, repolarization of the atria happens in the QRS. So you can see the repolarization spreading through of the atria and the ventricles. If you were going to do your bonus for the EKG, this is what you would color yellow when it tells you to color yellow. The yellow in this picture is what you would color red when it says color it red. And the red in this picture is what you would color green when it says color it green. So when you do that bonus, it's going to want this image and this image combined on one. So this is what you would color yellow, this is what you would color red, and this is what you would color green. So if you're filling out that bonus, looking at these images just basically did those 2 pages, those 2 points of the bonus for you. Now the rest of the chapter, completely ignore. It's just walking you through using an EKG, and we again are not actually doing an EKG. So that is all the information for exercise 30 and 31. There's a lot of content, so you're going to want to spend a lot of time studying this material before the practical.